Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop with a brand new video for you today. And at today's shop, we're talking about an oldie but goodie. All right, listen, if you're young, if you're watching this video and you're 15 or 18 or even in your 20s, you might not even know what this bait is. But for the older anglers, you're gonna remember this bait. And you should know this bait because it still catches fish. And in today's video, we're talking about the good old ball and chain. That's right, guys. We're talking about I can't get it unknotted! In this video, we're talking about the old ball and chain. You know what I mean? The Carolina rig. And listen, although this technique is old, although it's kind of old school, it still catches a ton of fish. You know, this technique I think is forgotten about because with a lot of these modern ways to catch them, drop shotting, Nico rigging, hover strolling, right? You tend to forget about the basics of a technique. But the Carolina rig, without a doubt, covers a lot of water, lets you probe shallow to deep, and makes fish react on this bait that falls a little differently than a lot of the more traditional ways to catch fish. So I really want to flush it out, and let's start with the components for a Carolina rig, right? The nuts and bolts of what lies here. First one is the weight. And generally on a Carolina rig, we're using heavier weights. And we're using these heavier weights to cover water, to get down. But the main reason we're using these heavier weights is to transmit what's on the bottom. And in today's age of, high-priced electronics, I think this is a little bit of a lost art, which is using the weight to feel around with what's on the bottom, Even with active target, even with forward-facing sonar, a lot of times fish get real low or you don't really know the bottom composition, the substrate of what's down there. That weight's going to let that happen, right? So it's a really great way to cover water. It's a great way to get down on the bottom. It's a great way to transmit what's on the bottom. So weight size, 1/2 ounce, 3/4, and 1 ounce are the three main sizes that we're going to use. You've heard me say this before in other videos, but I want to pick the weight that's heavy enough to maintain bottom contact, right? So shallower water, 0 to 10 or 15 feet, 1/2 ounce weight is usually great. As you get deeper, 15 to 20, 15 to 30, a 3/4 is great. And then that 1 ounce is great in really deep water. It's great in heavy current. It's great on windy conditions, right? So we're basically picking one of those three sizes that's heavy enough to maintain bottom contact. When I'm Carolina rigging, guys, I am a huge fan of that style weight right there, which is called a barrel style weight. A lot of companies making that style weight, and they're making it in tungsten. And I really prefer tungsten on my Carolina rig weight because, you heard me just say it, right? Tungsten transmits better what's on the bottom than lead. Lead is soft. Lead is spongy, and when I'm Carolina rigging, I want to know what's down there. I want to know when I'm hitting a hard bottom versus a soft bottom. I want to know when I'm pulling through weeds versus sand. And so tungsten allows you to do that. The other nice thing about that barrel weight is, to me, this is the best all-around style weight to use for Carolina rigging, right? A worm weight, a bullet-shaped worm weight, if I can find one, is great when we're around weeds, right? When we're fishing through grass, a bullet weight is great. But what happens when we get to a harder bottom composition? What happens when we get to rocks? That sucks. That's a pointy weight that wants to dig in. You know, you could say the same with a blunt style weight, like a football style weight. They have a few football sliders, and that weight is great around rocks, but sucks around grass. So the nice thing about that style, that barrel style weight, is it's a great all-around Carolina rig weight. Comes through rocks. If you look at it, it's kind of blunt, so it'll come through rocks, but it's got a little bit of a pointy shape to it as well, so it'll come through grass. So barrel style weight, 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce. I love the 1/2 and the 3/4 size. Next component on our Carolina rig, guys, if you look at this, is a bead. 6 to 8 millimeter bead. And unlike the old school beads that we used to use, because we're using tungsten, I want you to pick a plastic bead instead of a glass bead. So tungsten's so hard that if that 6 or 8 millimeter orange or red bead is glass, when that tungsten weight drops on it, it'll break that bead, it'll cause line damage, and you don't want that. So 6 to 8 millimeter plastic bead, orange or red is what I usually get. By the way, you can get them at Tackle Warehouse. You can also get them at a hobby store if you want to go to a hobby store. And then the next component is a barrel swivel. So before I get into that barrel swivel, that bead is there for 2 reasons. That bead is there to protect that knot, right? Because as you see how we're going to work it in a second, we're pulling this through a lot of stuff. And we're pulling it through stuff, we have to protect that knot, especially on the front side of that swivel. So that bead is protecting the knot. The other thing that bead's doing is, listen to this, guys. Literally, it's just knocking that bead and making a little, and it's helping attract fish to the rig, okay? So 6 to 8 millimeter bead, a knot, and then our barrel swivel. And here's the thing, when I choose my barrel swivel, I try not to skimp on it, right? I want to use this is a Sampo swivel. It's a 2-way swivel. It's got a ball bearing in it. So it's going to really act as a sort of a connector between our main line and our leader, but it's also going to help with line twist. And so when you don't skimp on the swivel, because getting a bearing swivel will not allow that leader side to twist, okay? All right, so the front side of a Carolina rig, you got it. 1/2 to 1 ounce a barrel style weight, 6 to 8 millimeter plastic bead, barrel swivel, black ball bearing. And then we're going to go to a length of leader to our bait. Now, always get a lot of questions about Carolina rigging, the ball and chain. And the number one question I get is, how long should my leader be? Okay? And I've got a couple just good general rules of thumb for you to follow for the length between that swivel and your meat. Okay? And here goes the rules. In ultra clear, clean, clear water environments, we want to use a longer leader. Okay? Let's call it 3 to 4 foot leader. Okay? That's about what that is. That's about a 3 to 4 foot leader. Ultra clear, clean water, long leader. But the opposite is true. Dirty water, you get to a place in your Carolina rig and the water's stained or off-colored or muddy. I don't want a 4 foot leader. I don't want a 5 foot leader. I want a shorter leader. So I'm going to go to a 2 foot, 2.5 foot, sometimes even an 18-inch leader, because I want to get that bait closer to the weight, right? In clear water, I want the bait further away from the weight. In dirty water, I want it closer to that weight. Remember, that weight, as we drag it, is going to kick up silt. It's going to make that noise. And in dirty water, having the lure closer to that helps you. In clear water, I want that to attract them, but then I want them to look really far behind it and see this natural bait coming by, okay? So dirty water, short leader, clear water, long leader. Let's talk about cold water versus warm water. General rule of thumb, the colder the water you get, if you get water that's, let's call it, 50s, mid to upper 50s or colder, I like a shorter leader. When we get to warmer water, we get to after the spawn, and this is a lot of times when we're fishing this rig, post-spawn in the summertime, I like a longer leader, right? I want to get that away from it. So colder water, shorter leader, warmer water, longer leader, okay? So there's a couple of the reasons why to pick leader length. The last one I want to throw in there is the type of cover you're fishing. So I really try to think about the cover that's on the bottom when I'm throwing that Carolina rig. And especially if it's a grass, a submergent grass, or rocks, or whatever the cover type is, I always want that bait to be riding higher than the cover. So that's my last determiner of leader length, is thinking about the cover and making sure the bait rides above it. So if you're fishing eelgrass in 15 feet of water and the eelgrass is 18 inches, I want that leader to be higher than the length of the eelgrass, right? Same thing with rocks or sticks or whatever, right? So incorporate that in there as well. All right, last but not least on the actual rig, guys, and by the way, we're going to talk about the rod, the reel, and the line in just a second, is our hook and bait, okay? Our hook and bait. Number one rule for a Carolina rig with hook is do not pick an overpowering hook for a Carolina rig, because this bait is going to be all about the glide in the fall. So put away your extra heavy, put away your heavy gauged flipping style hooks, your 3X, 2X hooks, put them away. I want you to use a standard gauge or a medium wire hook, okay? The hook's really going to be dependent on the bait, but for the style of baits that I'm going to show you, this is really an unbelievable style. And this is a Berkley Fusion hook that they call their worm style hook. But when you look at it, it's a really nice hybrid of a straight shank, a regular offset, and an EWG. So I'll pull this up for a second so you can look at it. It's got a little EWG style to it, but it's more elongated. So it really does give me the best of both worlds. But when I'm picking that hook, I never want to overpower the bait with the hook, okay? All right, let's get to the meat. And I'm going to show you 3 styles of baits, but they all have one common denominator, okay? And without a doubt, and this is the bait I have rigged. I'll rig it back here Texas style and show you. Even today, in 2024, this is my favorite Carolina rig bait, and it is the good old plastic lizard. This is a Berkley Power Lizard. Got it in a 4-inch, a 6-inch, and an 8-inch. I love it on a Carolina rig because it's got these little side appendages that are going to move as the bait flows. It's got a little curl tail that's going to move as the bait flows. But the number one reason I love a lizard on a Carolina rig, you ready? Flat bottom. Guys, when I'm selecting a plastic to Carolina rig, the flat bottom lures excel on this rig, okay? And you're going to see it with all 3 of these shapes, but flat bottom, when the bait's falling and gliding, and you're going to see this in a second. Think about the dynamics of a sled going down a sledding hill, right? If you had a sled that had a square bottom, you're not going anywhere. But if you have a sled that's flat on the bottom and smooth, it's going to glide down that hill, right? Same thing with these baits. So flat bottom on a lizard. My number 2 bait, and the great thing I love about this style bait is just like the lizard, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, you can get them in big ones, bigger than 8-inch, is a straight tail worm. This one is the Berkley Power Bait Bottom Hopper. And just like the lizard, look at it, ready? Rounded top. But when you look at the bottom of that straight tail worm, it's flat as a pancake. Okay? When we rig this lizard or this worm, we always want the flat side facing down. Okay? So think about that in your rigging. Okay? So we'll take the lizard off, and I'll just rig this on this Carolina rig real quick for you with this worm. So I'm going to Texas rig it. Normal Texas rig, go in 1/8 of an inch, pop it out. But I'm consciously making sure that when I Texas rig it, the flat side of that worm is facing down at the bottom, right? There's my normal Texas rig, going nice and straight. And as it falls, it's going to glide down versus tumble, right? We don't want it tumbling. Last but not least, and this is especially when I'm using a Carolina rig and I need a more finesse approach, this is one of my favorites. And this is a French fry, 4-inch French fry. It's a bait by Berkley Power Bait called a lugworm. But like a broken record, guys, it's got a flat bottom. I put that flat bottom facing down, and it's going to slide down, okay? All right, we got the weight, we got the bead, we got the swivel, we got our leader length, we got our hook, and we got our meat. Now let's talk about the rod and reel, and then I'm going to end by talking about the technique, and it's so easy, guys, how to fish a Carolina rig. The rod and reel, remember, 1/2, 3/4, 1 ounce tungsten weight. It's big, it's heavy. This is not a finesse technique. This is a power fishing technique. And because of that, we're going to use a casting rod. You really want a longer rod because think about, look how long this is. Guys, look. I've got my weight. I have 3-4 feet of leader. I've got to make a lob cast with this, right? I've got to make an overhand lob cast and really throw that thing out there far. So because of that, I need a long rod. I need a rod that can give me the leverage to launch the bait and the leverage to set the hook on a long cast, okay? So because of that, longer rod. We're going to use a 7.4 to 7.6 medium heavy rod. 7.4 to 7.6 medium heavy casting rod. This is the Abu Garcia, the brand new Ike 3.0 series. And this is the 7.6 medium heavy, okay? So longer rod, medium heavy, 80-20, right? Look, 80-20, 20% of that rod's got tip, 80% has backbone. Long, medium heavy rod. Next thing on the casting reel, as long as it has a 7.1 to 1 or greater, you're in good shape. Big fan of the Abu Garcia. This is the Revo SX. This is the, let's see, I think it's the 7.3 to 1. Great ratio for a Carolina rig. 8 to 1 is perfect. All right, last but not least, line choice. I'm a big fan of get out of there! I'm a big fan of line on a Carolina rig that is fluorocarbon for my main line and my leader. And let me really explain this and flesh this out with you. The reason is I want that line falling quick. I want it getting down. And then especially on my leader end, of this rig, I want that dense fluorocarbon to give this bait maximum action. If I were to throw that on mono, it's too buoyant, or braid, it's too buoyant. I want it to get down, and I want it to drift naturally as it's falling, okay? So fluorocarbon for my main line, fluorocarbon for my leader, but I always, and I mean always, you ready for this? Big tip here, guys. I use one size heavier on my main line than I do on the leader, okay? So a lot of times I'm using 17 or 20 on my main line. Then for my leader, I'm using one step down, okay? So if I'm using 17 on my main line, I'm going to use 15 on my leader. If I'm using 20 on my main line, I'm using 17 on my leader. If I'm in ultra clear water with no cover, I might use 15 on my main line and then 12 for my leader. And the reason I'm doing that is to allow that line to get down, allow that bait to have action. But if I snag, if I'm Carolina rigging and I hook a stump and I hook the lure on that stump, if I pull on it and when it breaks, the lure will break off and the main line won't. So I'm saving the weight, the bead, the swivel, and I'm just having to break off my leader, and it's a lot easier to retie, okay? All right, so that's on line. All right, last but not least, and guys, I told you this is easy. Even though the ball and chain is sort of forgotten about, one of the reasons you should remember and fish this, it's so easy to fish. And guys, it really is a technique to drag along the bottom. So I'm making my long cast to where I think the fish are at or past my target zone, and I'm letting it fall to the bottom. Heavy weight, it's going to get down quick. Once that gets down to the bottom, guys, I'm going to drag this Carolina rig back to the boat. But there's a really important difference between the Carolina rig drag versus a jig drag, okay? If you're a fan of the channel, you've seen my videos on football jigs. You've seen my videos on Texas rigs. You've seen my videos on micro football jigs. But on a Carolina rig, I don't want to go 3 to 12 in front of me. I want to go 3 to 12 sideways, okay? So I'm actually, instead of going in front of my body, I'm sweeping to the side as I drag it back, okay? So, you know, it's a drag from 3 to 12, but not straight up and down to the side, okay? And it's not, when you go to the side, you're not going just straight like this to your hip. You're kind of going sideways at an angle so that when this thing ends up at 12, it should almost look like a baseball bat. Like you're gripping a baseball bat and it's almost reaching your shoulders. And the reason I'm going to the side versus up and down is I'm able to let that weight stay in contact better of the bottom, stay in better bottom contact when I go to the side. The other reason is when that fish bites it, that stance, that rod position is going to allow me to get a more effective, powerful hook set when I go to the side. Versus if I get caught here with a jig, I can pop it. With a Carolina rig, I got to really get into them, okay? So I'm making my cast, long cast past where I think the fish are, past the target, letting it get to the bottom. I begin this side sweep from 3 to 12, and as I pull it, I'm trying to let that weight transmit what's down there. And the minute that I feel it hit something different, I'm going to stop, okay? I'm going to stop. So if I'm dragging and I don't feel anything, nothing, then all of a sudden I feel it get into, I call it the rough. I start to feel the weight go and like hit hard stuff. I stop. Or if I'm hitting hard stuff the whole time and I feel it hit something and it stops, could be a weed, could be a log, I stop. And guys, here's what the bait is doing. I really want you to show this because it gives you a visual of why the Carolina rig is still good, even in today's age, because it does something that no other rigging does. As that bait is falling, as it hits the bottom and you drag it, ready? Look, it's being pulled and it wanders. It wanders. Flat bottom, it wanders. But when you stop, it settles down to the bottom. Boom. When you start pulling again, remember, look, that line goes through, right? As you start pulling again, it wants to contact the weight. The bait jumps up, and starts gliding again. When you pause, it settles back down. That flat bottom gliding motion, and then the pause, it's settling to the bottom, and then as you drag again, it popping up and falling again. That's the motion. Guys, that's the key to Carolina rigging. And don't forget, it's great because even with a 1 ounce tungsten weight, if that fish eats it and starts swimming away with it, all this stuff's power bait. They're not letting it go. They never feel the weight because they just pull it, right? It pulls through the line. So, you know, you have time, guys, when you're Carolina rigging. Remember, sweeping to the side, 3 to 12. You feel something, I hit something hard, I stop. I start dragging, it pops up, it lifts, and then all of a sudden I feel the bite. Guys, with the Carolina rig, because they don't feel that weight, you have time to reel down and sweep to the side. Just set as hard as you can to the side. Can't do that with a football jig. Can't do that with a heavy Texas rig because they feel the weight. With the Carolina rig, you have time to reel down on them, almost like a 3 count. You know, you feel the bite, he starts pulling. 1, 2, 3, and you've got him. Guys, if you're watching this and you're old and you remember this rig, if you're watching this and you're new and you had no idea about the Carolina rig, this system, the ball and chain, is a great rig. Listen to me, give this a try, use those techniques, especially when you're in more open water situations. Let the weight transmit the bottom, and I guarantee you're going to catch more fish. Give it a try, especially this summer. I hope you like what you're watching. If you like these videos, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel. Every single week, we're dropping a new video. If you're already subscribed, tell your fishing buddies about the channel. Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We're here to help you learn more about fishing, give you some tips, and hopefully catch more fish. We'll see you later. Bye, guys. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli out in the shop. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, you have to check out that one, and I hope you like them.